Generative AI is here, and it has changed the rules of the game. Experts like Seth Godin and Robert McKee have been very clear. The authors who are going to make it in this business are those who are writing truly amazing, knock your socks off innovative stories. The bar is that high. AI will replace mediocre writers. But at some point, everybody is mediocre. So what do? You educate yourself. And the good news is that there's still time, but you've got to start leveling up right away. I'm Valerie Francis, and I've got a series of webinars to help you do just that. My specialty is helping authors like you put theory into practice. Understanding the tools of our trade and being able to apply them with precision is no longer an option. It's an absolute necessity. So go to valeriefrancis.ca/webinars for more information and sign up for the notifications. You can't afford not to.
If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor, and poet, and I have a passion for spy stories, fairy tales, and master detective novels.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I focus on stories by, for, and about women.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Fatal Attraction so that we can study character development. This 1987 film was directed by Adrian Lyne from a screenplay by James Dearden, and it's based on a short film entitled Diversion that Dearden made in 1979. Now, of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie, and we'd really love it if you could give the show a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page, scroll down to the bottom, and click 5 stars. It's that simple. Okay, Valerie, this is your choice, and I'm really interested to see which character you chose this week, or did you look at all of them?
Well, I have a lot to say this week, and I will try my best not to run too long. This is such a well-crafted story that honestly, we could talk about it for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. It's definitely one of the stories to put in your repertoire of reference movies because you can turn to it to learn pretty much any of the storytelling principles, although maybe not world building, but pretty much any of the other ones. Now, way back in the first episode of this season, I said that sometimes characters are developed. In other words, the character changes from the beginning of a story to the end. Other times, the character is revealed, which means that the character doesn't change, but our understanding of that character changes. In Fatal Attraction, Alex Forrest is an example of a character who is revealed. Now, in the original movie, Alex is the antagonist, and way back in 1987, we didn't question that. We just went with it. Some people questioned it, but generally as a society, we accepted that. But the movie is so well crafted, and Alex's character is so well written that in 2023, we can watch the same movie and see Dan as the antagonist and Alex is the protagonist. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm just going to focus on Alex as the antagonist because that is the function that she is fulfilling in this story. Now, Alex's character is revealed to us through her action under pressure. Characters are always revealed through their action under pressure. But in addition to revealing her character, Alex's actions are also raising the stakes of the story. Now, I've said before that everything in story exists in a hierarchy. Between plot and character, character takes precedence. Within the group of characters, the protagonist is the most important character because that's who the audience empathizes with. And without empathy, no one's going to get past the first chapter. But the antagonist is a very, very close second because it's the antagonist that's driving the story forward. Now, you may have heard the saying that the middle build belongs to the antagonist, and Fatal Attraction is a brilliant example of that. I think the easiest thing for me to do is to take the movie act by act and look at Alex's behavior and see what they tell us about her and how they raise the stakes of the story. All right, so here's Act 1, which is the beginning hook. There aren't any alarm bells going off with respect to Alex. She's the archetype of the female temptress, and that's as old as time, sadly. Our first introduction to her is when Jimmy flirts with her at the book launch, and she gives him the evil eye, stink eye. Moments later, Dan sees her at the bar, and he kind of sort of apologizes. It's a 1980s version of an apology. And they exchange a few words, but nothing more. Alex does watch him leave with Beth, his wife, and it's clear that she has some kind of interest in him, but we don't know what that is. She could be thinking, oh, yeah, I'm going to trap this guy. Or she could be thinking, well, he's a nice guy. At least he tried to apologize. The next morning, Dan and Alex meet at work. Alex is very professional and intelligent, and she does a nice turn for Dan by discreetly letting him know that he has cream cheese on his nose. Another 80s thing, bagels and cream cheese. After the meeting, she does another kind turn for Dan by offering to let him stand under her umbrella in a torrential downpour of rain. Now, Alex is not under pressure yet, so her behavior is benign. There's nothing untoward. There's nothing to set off alarm bells. If she is sexually attracted to Dan, she's not acting on it. She's in control here. It's Dan who invites her out for a drink, and it's Dan who starts the flirtation. This flirtation is the first bit of pressure being applied on Alex, so her reaction to it starts to reveal who she is, because up to this point, she's been pretty nondescript. So how does she respond? Well, she flirts right back. In fact, she calls him on it. She basically makes him put his money where his mouth is, and this lets us know that she's not a pushover. She might look angelic. I mean, she's even wearing an all-white business suit. And she might have a soft, demure voice, but she has a strong personality. She is not a wallflower. Okay, so then they have a pretty significant one-night stand. She's definitely into sex, but so is he. There's no pressure on her here either because she's getting exactly what she wants, right? So there's nothing more to reveal about her other than she likes sex. And really, that's hardly surprising for any healthy 36-year-old woman, even in the 80s. All right. But all good things must come to an end. And for Dan, on Sunday morning, it's over. But Alex does not want it to be over. And so that applied pressure on her. So she can accept that it's over, or she can reject it. She rejects it and chooses to call him at home. Now, Dan is surprised to hear from her, but it's not totally weird. After all, he wasn't there when she woke up, and she knows his family's out of town, so there's not a huge risk here. It does reveal, however, that she is a woman who goes after what she wants. In fact, their entire conversation is Alex shooting down all his excuses. And Dan is so stupid, he doesn't realize that he's being played. He loves being pursued. He loves being the object of her desire. He is so flattered that he goes along with it. He's just this grinning fool. And in case we somehow miss that Alex is a woman who goes after what she wants, Dan says it right out loud. He says, "You don't give up, do you? You just don't give up." No, dude, she really doesn't. Run, buddy, run. Now the flattery continues Sunday evening when, over supper, Alex muses, "Why are the interesting guys all married?" Well, now, at this point, Dan is feeling like the cat who ate the canary. He's got a beautiful woman desiring him. She's cooked him an amazing meal. He's had great sex. He's had fresh air and exercise. All his needs have been met. And then he starts to talk about how lucky he is to have a great marriage. Like, Dan is so painfully stupid, it just boggles the mind. He has spent the last 2 days having sex with a beautiful woman. And then, While sitting in her home, eating her food, he talks about how much he loves another woman. Even if that other woman wasn't his wife, that's a pretty blockhead thing to do, don't you think? Like, just shut up and don't say anything at all, because all it does is highlight for Alex that she's a mistress and that he doesn't love her and that he's just been using her. This is big time pressure on Alex, and her response is fascinating. In the moment, she calls him out on it. This doesn't surprise us because we saw her in the original flirtation call him out on his words then, right? Put your money where your mouth is. She's calling him out here too. She says, well, if your marriage is so good, why are you here with me? You know what? That's a damn good question. She also asks him if the tryst between them is over and if they'll ever see each other again. Now, again, this is a fair question, and it's perfectly rational and reasonable for her to ask it. It does reveal, however, that she's lonely and that she's hurting in some way. Alex's backstory is never revealed because it's not the point of the film. And in this kind of a story, you don't want to create empathy with the antagonist. The filmmakers intentionally have not given us this information because they want the audience's empathy to stay with Dan. I know Glenn Close had a whole backstory for her, though. Now, Alex manages to keep Dan with her until Sunday evening, when he absolutely must go home. He can't put it off any longer because his family is returning. The fantasy must end now. It was fun while it lasted, but it's over. This is when we really start to understand who Alex is, who she truly is. This is the most pressure we've seen her under so far, and her action is extreme. Now, at first, what she does and what she says makes sense. We can understand that she doesn't like it when he runs off right after they've made love. It's like a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am kind of setup. We can understand that. And no, Dan hasn't considered her feelings for 1 second. He really has not. Nor has he been considering his wife's or his daughter's feelings. He has been thinking only about himself. So they argue, and she kicks him right in the rear end. And that was cathartic, I must admit. And it seems like this is the end, okay? Until she slits her wrists. Now, if this doesn't reveal a character, I don't know what does. It tells us a lot about Alex. She is already a million miles from the woman we thought we knew. That nice woman who discreetly let Dan know they had cream cheese on his nose, that's who we thought Alex was. She's already way, way, way far away from that, and she's only getting started. But what this is our first indication that Alex is not well. It's also a clear indication that the antagonist is calling the shots here. Now, she has been from the beginning. Dan just wasn't aware of it, but he knows now. Up to this point, the stakes have been relatively low for Dan. It's not like Beth will find out about the affair. I mean, the risk of that is low. Dan can get home on Sunday night and get all ready for work and all that kind of stuff, get everything sorted out so that when Beth comes home Monday evening, his life can slip back into the same pattern that he has always enjoyed. But when Alex slits her wrists, he has to stay with her all night. The chance of him getting caught now is much higher. Alrighty, so now we're into Act 2, which is Middle Build 1. And I'll go a little faster through the rest of the film, so we're not here all day. But I do encourage you to go through this movie yourself, scene by scene, and take a really close look at how the filmmakers have structured it, because they've done a great job with it here. Okay, in the second act, Alex shows up at Dan's office. Now, the stakes are raised here because this is an opportunity for his colleagues to know that these two are in contact. And remember, his best friend Jimmy works in the same law firm. Alex seems much more rational now and much more like the woman that we met at the outset of the film. She says that she has come to apologize and thank him for helping her. When he rejects her offer to see Madame Butterfly, she appears to take it in stride And as far as Dan is concerned, they are parting amicably. This is major pressure for Alex. She wants Dan, but he doesn't want her. This is rejection. So, what is she going to do? Well, Dan's life, you will notice, returns to normal, absolute normal. He's having a great time with his wife and the other couple that they hang out with. They're bowling. He is living the life of Riley. But her life is much worse than it was to begin with because now she's dealing with this rejection. She is totally depressed. She's sitting on the floor of her apartment in the dark, just flicking the light on and off. She is kind of out of body, actually. Whatever emotional balance that she had is gone. She is not in control like she was when we first met her. So, what does she do? She keeps calling Dan at his office. She's desperate. He keeps getting upset, and eventually he refuses to accept her calls at all. And at this point, Dan's secretary knows what's going on because she's the one accepting the calls. She knows this isn't just a client call. She's not a dumb woman. She knows what's happening here. Now, since Dan won't accept Alex's calls at the office, she has to start calling his house. As she says to him, "If you refuse to take my calls at the office, you leave me no choice." Now, here the stakes are going up again because Beth answers the phone in her own home. It's entirely possible that Alex could just start talking to Beth and tell her everything. When Alex can't get Dan on the phone at his home during waking hours, because, Beth answers the phone, she calls him at 2 a.m. and she demands that they meet the next morning. At that meeting, Alex tells Dan that she loves him. The kiss of death right there. Alex is under a lot of pressure here, and this behavior reveals how desperate she is. Then at the midpoint shift, Alex reveals that she's pregnant. Now, I think we're supposed to believe that this is legitimate, but it seems too convenient by half in terms of a plot device for me. And I did a little research on this, and there has been a lot of discussion since 1987 as to whether she really is pregnant. So, whether she is or isn't, Dan believes that she is. So, when Alex is under pressure here, what does she do? Because Dan says, "Well, it's got nothing to me. I'll pay for the abortion." Great guy. This is pressure now that she's under. It's going up and up and up. So what does she do? She exerts more pressure on Dan. And of course, the stakes are going up because it would have been one thing for Beth to have found out about an affair, but to find out that the woman he had an affair with is now expecting his child, this is a whole different ball of wax. And this is the midpoint shift, of course. So now this brings us into the third act, or middle bill 2. Dan is still trying to get away from this woman. So what he does is change his phone number, which means that Alex shows up at his house, and he comes home one day, and Alex is in the living room having a lovely cup of tea with his wife. The more pressure Alex is under, the more extreme her behavior becomes. Toward the end of the first act, and even into the second act, we thought of Alex as a lonely woman who was maybe going through some stuff, but who wasn't entirely wrong to wonder about the nature of their relationship. It's a fair question to ask, okay, is this it, or are we going to see each other again? That's a fair question. And although there were moments of bizarre and even disturbing behavior, she also had moments of lucidity and clarity. When Dan yells at her and tells her in no uncertain terms to back off, Alex reveals that she is quite self-aware. And this is surprising. This is the famous quote from the movie. Alex says, "Well, what am I supposed to do? You won't answer my calls. You change your number. I'm not going to be ignored, Dan." Oh, love Glenn Close. This shouldn't be a surprise to Dan. This really should not be a surprise if he's paying attention at all, because he has known this about her since the beginning hook. He is the one who said, "You don't give up, do you?" But he didn't understand the significance of it then, and really neither did we. We'd been wondering where the limit is for her. Like, what is the line that she won't cross? Ha. Well, now we know that the line doesn't exist. She's not going to give up. She will go right to the end, to the extreme to get Dan. He has made it abundantly clear that he wants nothing to do with her. Still, she pursues him. She pours acid on his car and destroys it. She follows him to his country home. And the famous boiling the pet rabbit scene, which is still disturbing, even though you know it's coming up and you've seen that clip 1,000 times since 1987, it's still disturbing. Even though I know it's not a real rabbit, doesn't matter. So Alex keeps upping the ante, and that's exactly what the antagonist does. That's her job in the story. That is her whole job in the story as an antagonist. Her behavior becomes more and more extreme, which means that for Dan, the stakes, or what he stands to lose, gets higher and higher and higher. At this point, his professional reputation isn't what it was at the outset. His secretary knows something's up. His best friend, who is also his colleague, knows the whole story. The local police also know the story because that lieutenant was not born yesterday. But he does still have his family. Not for long. This brings us now into the ending payoff. And the inciting incident there is when Alex kidnaps Ellen from school. Now, these stakes are high. This is high. Even though I've seen this movie before, I still felt myself becoming anxious because it's a little kid. And you're wondering, you can't help but wonder, oh, is this kid going to be safe? What's happening? But really, what Alex is doing there, her intention, I don't think, was to harm the child. It was to let Dan know how close she can get to him and to his family. When Dan confronts her and nearly chokes her to death, I might add, these are life and death stakes, also extremely high. Alex attacks him with a knife. At the very end of the film, Alex confronts Beth. And although she's there to attack Beth, she actually harms herself by slicing her leg with the knife. It's kind of gruesome. And in the end, Beth shoots Alex and kills her, which of course means that Dan has gotten away with the whole thing. Moving right along. before I have a rant. But this isn't the original ending. In the original ending, Alex commits suicide. Dan is arrested, but Beth finds a cassette on which Alex admits her intention to take her life. I think the original ending is much more in keeping with Alex's character. But whichever ending you prefer, the truth is that Alex is unwell. She is suicidal, and we know that from the beginning hook when she slit her wrists. But there is more to her. It's too easy to just dismiss her out of hand, because this is a very layered and complex character. Alex is obsessive, she's compulsive, she's lonely, she's depressed. Like, there's a lot going on with her psychology. The affair with Dan did not make her this way. She was like it all along. Their affair brought it to the surface and made the audience aware of it. So if you watch the movie a second time, knowing who Alex really is, it's a totally different story. That original flirtation scene in the restaurant becomes quite chilling if you look at the way Glenn Close is portraying the character. What looks originally as kind of coquettish is unnerving when you understand what she's going to ultimately do. Even that Saturday morning office meeting, even that's chilling because that's the last time that Alex had control over herself. And again, I mean, it's Glenn Close, so the performance is genius. Now, I feel like I just flew through Alex's character revelation. I hope I did it some kind of justice. The important points to remember here are that Alex does not change. What changes is our opinion of her. Alex's behavior not only reveals her character, but it also raises the stakes for Dan and consequently for the story. And in fact, that's what's driving the story forward. And finally, the antagonist has to have a point, and Alex makes many good points throughout the film. Okay, Melanie, it's time for me to stop talking and hand the mic over to you. How did you find world building for Fatal Attraction?
Well, it was actually a bit tricky because there isn't necessarily much world building in the movie, but that sort of, and it is the primary world, so that we would expect that, especially after what we talked about last week in the episode. The world building in Fatal Attraction isn't more or less nuanced than the other movies set in the primary world of New York, right? And this is the same setting as the movie Can You Ever Forgive Me? But it is a very different world, but it's not necessarily so different that it's unusual. The cityscapes are similar, but it is the smaller detail of the characters' everyday spaces that differentiates their worlds. So in Dan's world, there are many pictures of his wife and daughter, as well as family photos of the three of them, right? They're everywhere. Those photos are everywhere. Their apartment at the beginning of the movie where they live is small and cozy. And Dan apparently loves both his wife and his daughter. And they have good friends in Jimmy and Hildy, and even the dog seems great. So the world at the beginning of the movie is very cozy and very nice for Dan. But despite all this boring happiness, Dan meets Alex, and Alex's world is different. There's wild sex, there's Latin dancing, there's more sex in the elevator, and her energy in the outdoors when they go to walk the dog is actually quite intense. And there is something interesting about Alex when she's in her apartment. The decor in her apartment is mainly white, and she wears white when she's at home. And it's pretty much in every scene when she's at home, she is wearing white. I think there might be one or two scenes where she's not, but it's primarily what she wears when she's at home. Now, when she goes out, she wears colours, but it's mainly white at home. And this could be to keep her home as neutral as possible, as a contrast to her behaviour. Or it could be to convey the one part of her personality that is rooted in innocence. Now, I can hear you say, oh my gosh, what is she talking about? Alex is innocent? Oh my goodness. She's the psycho woman and the antagonist, right? But hear me out. If Alex is mentally ill, it is a possibility that something happened to her in her childhood and that the external actions we see are there to protect her childlike self. So the white clothing could be symbolic of her inner child. However, regardless, I do think it was a conscious choice to dress her in white for most of her home scenes. And I also think that the white is the visual link between Alex and Madame Butterfly. But I'll cover that in a minute. Now, as you'd expect, there are many scenes in homes and in the places that Dan spends his time, such as his office and with his family friends Jimmy and Hildy. And the movie starts and finishes in the family home with Dan's family intact. And I think that is very significant, right? The one aspect of the settings that really fascinated me this week was how the two halves of the movie were different in terms of their setting and their worlds. The first half was mainly set in Dan's home and Alex's home. The second half of the movie has more variety of settings, so the world opens up to demonstrate that Alex's reach is growing, even though Dan feels like his world is closing in. Now, of course, as Valerie mentioned, there's Dan's car, there's the move to the country, there are even more scenes in Dan's office, there's the new house, the backyard, and Ellen's school. Now, as Alex becomes more and more like a stalker, then the world building supports Alex's increasing impact on Dan and then Ellen and Beth as well. So the expansion of the world is symbolic of her reach, basically. However, in direct contrast with the greater variety in the settings in the second half, it is interesting that Alex doesn't directly threaten Dan's professional life. Now, she does turn up at his work, but his career per se is never threatened or presented as threatened in the movie. And I found this as a bit odd, considering that they met because of their work and people were aware of who she was. But perhaps being a defamation lawyer means that it's difficult to be defamed. I'm not really sure. But I don't think there was ever a real direct threat to his career. And it's something that Alex could have threatened quite easily with her company or her work being a direct, having that law firm as a direct client for them. Now, it is also worth noting that the final showdown between Dan, Alex, and Beth happens in the bathroom. And the bathrooms are intimate places, right? That's where we are naked and where we become very vulnerable. And it is significant in this story that the climactic scene takes place in this setting. And so setting then becomes important as a general rule because it either reinforces or contrasts the action that is happening between the characters. And I thought that that was very interesting. And if you try to think about that scene and where else it could have happened, it would take away the impact of it. So I think that scene happening in the bathroom was actually a very good choice of setting. And that goes, as you're writing, that goes for things that you need to think about. How does this support the action that's happening, or how does it directly contrast or contradict or signify other things to the reader about the characters and what is actually happening and going on? Now, the use of Madame Butterfly, and this is the bit that I found the most fascinating this week, right? So the use of Madame Butterfly as a parallel metaphor in the movie offers the audience, I think, the most significant commentary on Dan's behaviour. And this is important because Dan gets off lightly in the movie. Now, of course, the audience must be aware of the plot of Madame Butterfly for this to work. And I think it's generally well known enough that maybe the majority of people have some sort of understanding of it. Now, the antagonist in Madame Butterfly is Pinkerton. And he's an American who goes to Japan as part of his role in the Navy. And he marries a 15-year-old Japanese girl given the nickname Butterfly, so that he can have a sexual affair while visiting Japan. He has no intention of staying married to Butterfly, and he leaves her shortly after the wedding so that he can go and find a proper American wife. Now, Pinkerton is completely amoral because he doesn't believe he is bound by any morality. He is entitled and he believes that he can get away with his deception. He is arrogant to a T. Pinkerton is also a coward. When he returns to Japan 4 years after leaving Butterfly, he brings his wife with the intention of adopting Butterfly's son. And when he sees the effort Butterfly has made to decorate the house for his return, he leaves his American wife and two other characters to explain what is happening to Butterfly. So why he is there, he leaves it to other people to do that. And then Butterfly actually realizes what she should have realized all along, that he's never coming back, that it wasn't a real marriage. And she says goodbye to her son. So she's going to hand over her son to this American couple. And then she goes and kills herself. But she does it in a way culturally that means that she regains her honor. Now, the original ending, as Valerie has mentioned, of Fatal Attraction has Alex doing the same as Butterfly. Butterfly was delusional about Pinkerton. She did think he loved her, and she gave up her religious beliefs, culture, and family for him. But once she'd realised what he'd done, the only way for her to regain her honour was to kill herself. And the inscription on the knife that she uses to do that actually says, "Let him die with honour who cannot live with honour." Now, Alex was meant to kill herself in the same way as Butterfly, and this ending was also, I think, meant to reflect Alex's love for that opera. However, the test screening showed that the audience did not like that ending, so it was rewritten and reshot. Now, noting there are some similarities between the opera and the film, I believe Alex is a butterfly-like character, and in the same way, I think that Dan also mirrors Pinkerton. Alex's white attire, which I mentioned before, is also reflective of the white attire worn in honourable suicide rituals, and Butterfly actually wears a white kimono when she dies in the opera. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Alex wears white when she's at home, and I think it's to do with the original plot to draw some parallels between Madame Butterfly and Fatal Attraction. And if the original ending had remained, then the opera would have been a good example of how to use other stories to support the world of the characters in a new story. But the second ending severed that tie. However, I do think it's a technique that is worth drawing your attention to and something that you can look for more in stories and see how that is done as a way to support world building or to enhance and enrich the world that you're trying to build. All right, Valerie, what is the action step for this week?
I want you to spend some time considering your antagonist. Is he who he appears to be? Because if that's the case, your story's in trouble. Or are you revealing his true nature bit by bit over the course of the story? If you're not, look for ways that you can.
All right, that wraps it up for this week. Join us next week when we discuss everything, everywhere, all at once. So to support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For access to writing templates and worksheets and more than 70 hours of training, subscribe to Valerie's Inner Circle by visiting valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle and follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Valerie_Francis. If you'd like to get my tips about books to help you read like a writer, visit me on Facebook and Instagram under Melanie Hill Author, or find out more about me at melaniehill.com.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.